Welcome to Catholic Answers Live, the program where you participate with your questions about apologetics and evangelization, including the most important theological, spiritual, moral, and social issues facing the world today. Call now with your question for today's guest. Toll free 1-888-31-TRUTH. That's 888-318-7884. Now, from San Diego, Catholic Answers Live.
And Holy Week has begun for Christians around the world, and we begin our program today acknowledging, or at least taking a moment to acknowledge, our brother and sister Christians in Egypt who were attacked while they celebrated Palm Sunday. At least 45, we now know, have been killed, and another 125 at least injured. And ISIS has claimed responsibility, the Islamic State, and Egypt is now under a state of emergency. So please pray for our brothers and sisters and for an end to the ongoing persecution, the systematic persecution of Christians in the Middle East.
And for Pope Francis, who's going to be going there in 2 weeks.
Oh,
I confirmed that he's still going.
He's still okay. So indeed, let's pray for all those things. So that was scheduled before, and so the question was, would he cancel it?
Right.
And he's not going to.
He's not canceling.
Well, well, God bless him. That's a brave move. And certainly, the images are extraordinary out of Egypt and disturbing, and certainly should motivate us to prayer. And having said that, I think there's little more we can do than do our very best to share the truth about God's love for each of us in Christ, which is exactly what this week is all about. Our topic this hour is Holy Week and Easter. And if you have questions about this most holy week of the year or about the Easter season that follows, please give us a call at 888-31-TRUTH, 888-318-7884. Our guest is Jimmy Akin, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, author of A Daily Defense, 365 days plus one. I went right to plus.
Yeah,
I went plus
kind
one.
Hybridizing the words.
And I didn't, because we got a lot of material, I didn't pick out a question from A Daily Defense. But you can start a Daily Defense on any day. It just starts on day one and goes 366 days, and or you can leaf through it and start in the middle. And that's kind of how I do it.
Yeah.
That's just...
You could even read it backwards if you want. It's up to you.
You'd have to be a heck of a reader.
The possibilities are unlimited.
Yeah, really, upside down.
Well, it's probably more like 366 factorial, but...
Okay, all right. Again,
something like
math that. On the air, Jimmy. Please don't do that to me.
Okay.
I cannot think in numbers. Even off the air, I'm not that good at it. But so we say it's Holy Week.
Yes.
And Holy Week reaches its
climax
on Easter.
Ish.
And okay, all right. Well, it reaches
liturgically. It reaches its climax at Easter Vigil.
Yeah. Okay. Right. All right. So, however, that brings me to the question about Easter.
Okay.
Not everyone will celebrate Easter on the same day.
True.
And so, what's that about? Why do we have different Easter dates?
Well, there have been controversies about Easter periodically in church history. Like one of the most famous was in the 2nd century. There was a group of Christians in what's now Turkey that were called Quartodecimians. And the reason for that, as if you know Latin, Quartodecimian sounds like the word for 14 in Latin. And so they were the 14thers. And the reason they were called that is because they insisted on celebrating Easter on the 14th of the month of Nisan, regardless of what day of the week it fell on. So they could have an Easter on a Wednesday or something.
Yeah.
And this was something that other Christians who were celebrating it on Sunday, including Pope Victor in Rome, didn't approve of that. And so there was a controversy. It took a while to get it ironed out. But it did get ironed out. And at the First Council of Nicaea in 325, a common date was established for Easter, which is basically the formula we use now. The way it's calculated is it's the first Sunday on or after the spring equinox. The trouble is calculating the spring equinox because not only does it move around the calendar a little bit it can be like March 19th, March 20th, March 21st, so it changes from year to year, but also you have to figure out when March begins, and that's a more complex issue than a lot of people would realize. It seems like everybody all over the world uses the same calendar. And for civil purposes, that's true. We all use the Gregorian calendar that was introduced in 1582 by Pope Gregory. That's why it's called Gregorian, Gregory the 13th. And the thing is, though, there was another calendar that had previously been in use called the Julian calendar. And the difference between the Gregorian calendar and the Julian calendar is very, very slight. You know how we say that leap year occurs once every 4 years?
Yes.
Well, that's where it occurs on the Julian calendar. The Julian calendar presupposes that the Earth's year is 365.25 days. So once every 4 years, you need to add a new day. Really, though, it's not. It's like 365.2422. So it's just slightly shorter than a quarter day, and that means if you add a leap day every 4 years, you're going to get out of sync with the seasons. And so over the course of time, over centuries, that started to happen. These extra leap days built up on the Julian calendar, and so to correct for that, Pope Gregory the 13th introduced a new calendar where you have a leap year every 4 years except on the century marks. So like there was no leap year in 2000, even though you can divide it by 4. There's no leap day that year. And this is a much more accurate calendar, but some folks have human natures. And human natures,
Some people do?
Yeah, and human natures can be stubborn, especially when it comes to religion.
I'm sorry to do math on there, but what percentage of people would you say have human natures? Just a ballpark figure.
Persons, I couldn't say because I don't know how many persons there are that are non-human. I mean, angels are persons. We have the 3 persons of the.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
There could be aliens, but of those that have human natures, they can be stubborn, especially when it comes to religion.
Yeah.
And so in various places in Christendom, particularly in the East, they still use the Julian calendar for liturgical purposes. They use the Gregorian calendar for civil purposes. So if you walk into a courthouse, they're going to say today is May 10th. But on the liturgical calendar, it's still March 28th. And so because of that, it's going to affect when we're now 2 weeks out of sync between the Gregorian and the Julian calendars. And so because of that, it can happen that the spring equinox will coincide, in which case we end up celebrating Easter on the same day. That's happening this year. But it can also happen that the Julian calendar will recognize the spring equinox on a different day, in which case Easter will be later in various Eastern churches. And that's what's going to happen next year. So next year they're going to be out of sync.
Okay, and now which one? I'm this a little bit off maybe, but Jesus. That it's Passover week.
Right.
So how does Passover always match up with Easter? Or
it's close because the determination of the date of Passover is coincides with the spring equinox, because the Jewish calendar was based on, it was a lunar calendar. And in fact, I've gone back and read the regulations they had for determining this. In the first century in Jerusalem, now it's different today, but in the first century in Jerusalem, what they would have is a sighting of the new moon. And they would have guys who, with sharp eyes, so they didn't need glasses, which hadn't been invented yet anyway. They had these guys with sharp eyes who would look to see, is the moon new? And that was the beginning of their month. And they would then have the sharp-eyed guys come and be interviewed by some officials who would ask them questions to test them to see did they really see the new moon or not. For example, you know how the moon, when it's waxing or waning, it points one direction or the other?
Yes, right, yeah. Right.
And most people never think about that, and they never notice, well, which direction does it point when it's waxing or waning?
Right.
Well, they would ask the sharp-eyed moon spotters, which direction was it pointing? And if they said the wrong direction, they'd dismiss their testimony. But then they would, if they had a valid sighting of the new moon, they'd then proclaim it, and they'd send messengers out to nearby regions so that Jewish people would know it's the beginning of the new month. And so they determined the beginning of the month actually on a month-to-month basis. And things like, is it cloudy, could interfere with when the month began. Or is it cloudy in Jerusalem could interfere with it. And so it was kind of an uncertain thing, and distant Jewish communities couldn't really use that test, so they had to have their own ways. And that's one of the reasons that eventually, at least by the 2nd century, a lot of Christians said we really shouldn't be relying on Jewish calculations to determine the date of Easter. We need to have our own so we can predict it. And so there was kind of a drifting apart, but there's still at the same approximate time of the year, but not timed exactly the same.
We'll take a break, but I just want to know one quick thing. So if we say if we make the assumption, it's not an assumption, but we the educated guess that 33 A.D. is the year where it happened, of the Lord's Passion. Then do we know a date in there when? Oh, okay.
We do. April 3rd.
So April 3rd, 33 A.D. would be the Good Friday?
Would be the original Good Friday, yeah.
Wow, that's very precise. But we know that because we have a record of when they celebrated the Passover.
We know that because we can calculate when it would have been.
I see.
We know it happened during the reign of Pontius Pilate, so that's AD 26 to 36. We know it was on a Friday before Passover, or Friday in conjunction with Passover, I should say, and that narrows us down to AD 30 and 33.
Because Friday,
right?
Those are the only days where Friday matched up with,
right?
Okay,
and then we can eliminate 30 because John records Jesus' ministry as lasting at least 3 years, and Luke indicates it didn't begin until at least AD 29, and you can't fit 3 years between AD 29 and 330.
So
by the way, some good news on the common celebration of Easter front.
Yeah,
there are efforts to get Christians celebrating it on the same day together, which would be a big, important witness to the world of Christian unity.
Right.
And the Second Vatican Council, in its Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy, said the Church doesn't have an objection to fixing the date of Easter if other Christians want to do that.
Right.
And in 2014, the Coptic Pope, the head of the Coptic Church, sent Pope Francis a letter saying, can we do this?
Oh, beautiful.
Can we find a way to do this? And Pope Francis has reciprocated, and the Anglicans have gotten in on the discussion now, and so now there's a motion underway between the major leaders of Christian groups trying to find a way to have a common celebration of Easter. One of the proposals, not the only one, but one of the proposals is to fix it on either the second or third Sunday in April.
I see.
But there are other possibilities too, and regardless of what possibility might emerge from all that, let's hope and pray that it does.
Amen to that. We'll take a quick break, and we'll be back with more. Our topic, Holy Week and the Easter season. If you've got any questions about what we celebrate during Holy Week or the Easter season, 888-318-7884 is the number. Jimmy Akin, senior apologist at Catholic Answers, is our guest, and we will be right back.
Catholic Answers Live with Jimmy Akin is coming right back.
This is apologist Tim Staples, and I'm here to tell you about the most exciting and innovative Catholic book in years. In today's world, people from countless perspectives pose challenges to our Catholic faith every day, in conversations, through the mass media, on the internet, and more on the infinite collection of social media platforms. There's no getting away from this daily onslaught. We as Catholics need to stand strong to be prepared to mount a daily defense, to respond to the many challenges that we as believers are presented with every day. To that end, my good friend and apologist extraordinaire Jimmy Akin has come up with what will surely be a go-to resource for years to come, a daily defense. A Daily Defense takes up a different challenge for every day of the year, 366 in all, teaching you how you can defend the faith and give answers to Catholics and skeptics alike. And it's user-friendly, with challenges and answers indexed alphabetically by scripture verses or by topic, so finding the answers can be quick and easy. Order your copy of A Daily Defense today by calling 1-888-291-8000, visiting Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
The Catholic Answers Minute. I'm Father Vincent Serple. In John 12, when Jesus had dinner with Martha, Mary, and their brother Lazarus, Mary took a liter of costly perfumed oil and anointed his feet and dried them with her hair. His disciple Judas Iscariot complained that the money spent for the oil could have been better used for the benefit of the poor. But Jesus defended her. He knew well that the day was drawing near when those feet would bear his wounded body, and they themselves would be pierced by a nail. Let her keep this for the day of my burial, he said. While Judas and some of the others groused over such an expenditure for aromatics, Mary gave her attention to her Lord. Her humble and expansive gesture draws our attention to him. Is this not why we live our lives, and the reason we have lives at all? Again, Mary chose the better part. I'm Father Vincent Serpa for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
Call now with your question, 888-318-7884. This is Catholic Answers Live.
A very blessed Holy Week to you and all of yours. We are discussing Holy Week this hour on Catholic Answers Live. Holy Week, Easter, and the Easter season. Any questions you've got about those times are more than welcome. Jimmy Akin is our guest. 888-318-7884 is the number. And at the break, I was explaining to Jimmy why Maundy Thursday is called Maundy Thursday.
And why is it called Monday
I'm
Thursday?
not saying it again because you told me I was wrong. I'm not going to repeat it. Okay, I will say
Well,
it.
that's
All right.
okay.
I clearly I was misinformed, so I'm just not even sure about my faith life anymore. But I thought that it had to do with the washing of the feet, but apparently it doesn't. And you said to me, "Well, why would the word Maundy have to do with that?" And my answer was because somebody told me. That's so.
Well, that works for most things. You know,
If somebody
that's how
tells
we
you.
get most of our knowledge is from someone telling
Yeah,
us.
that's true. That's right.
But in this case, there's not a direct connection. Now, I can see how you could say there's an indirect connection, but it's not a direct one. The generally accepted, now there's even a dispute about this, but the generally accepted account among linguists is that the origin of the term Maundy Thursday is that it's based on the Latin word mandatum. And that Maundy is an anglicization of mandatum.
Can I guess then? So do this in memory of me. Is that his mandate?
No, that's not the mandate. It's not in this case.
Okay.
It's based on the Vulgate, the Latin translation of what Jesus says in John's Gospel, a new commandment, a new mandate, new mandatum I give you to love one another. And so since he said that at the Last Supper, it became known as Maundy Thursday because that was read in the liturgy.
And what was he doing when he said that?
Telling them to love each other.
But wasn't that during the washing of the...
It's not in the washing of the feet. He's washing their feet when he's washing their feet.
Just trying.
It's
Come
just
on,
at the
Jimmy.
same event. But here's an indirect connection for you. So the rite of foot washing is an expression of Christ's love for us, and we're to love each other. He says, the way I've loved you, love each other.
Yeah.
And so it's in conjunction with the washing of the feet, but it's not based on the washing of the feet. The name comes from, or is generally accepted to come from, the commandment to love each other. Now, I mentioned there is a kind of minority position on that, which says that it's actually based on the giving of alms that was common on that day in, like, England. In certain periods of history, and that it's related to the word for almsgiving. But that's not, I haven't seen that in a scholarly source. If you check scholarly sources, they point to the mandatum understanding of its origins.
Okay. Well, let me guess some of the other names then about, see if I know. If
For
I'm
Holy
right.
Week?
Yeah, for Holy
Okay.
Week. See if I'm right about that.
Sure.
Palm Sunday, because
Got the
Jesus
palms,
could
yeah.
palm a basketball? No.
No,
That
no,
wasn't
no,
it?
no, no. Because of the palms that the people use.
Yes, I know that one.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay. So, it's also sometimes called Passion Sunday
Passion,
because we
because-
read the Passion.
That's right. Yeah.
And we get to play our part.
Mm-hmm.
And some people say prophesy, and some people say prophecy.
Uh-huh.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
At that part. Mm-hmm. Spy Wednesday. When I saw this on your list of, I thought I don't know anything about Spy Wednesday.
Well, so Spy Wednesday is sometimes called that because Judas agreed to spy on Jesus and help the authorities figure out where he was going to be so they could arrest him.
Okay.
And so it's on some chronologies that happened on Wednesday. The Gospels really don't say that,
Yeah.
but that's how it's often been reckoned. And so,
Okay.
so that's why it's called Spy Wednesday.
And then Maundy Thursday follows, of course, because of the washing of the feet. And what? Sorry. I was
No.
And then
We covered that.
people. Now this is the one when you're a kid you just don't get. Good Friday.
Good Friday,
Why do we
yeah.
call this Good Friday? This is Bad Friday. Clearly, it's Bad Friday.
Right. Well, okay. So and I'm going to fess up now. You admitted to faulty etymology, and so I'll do the same.
Oh.
Back when I was a beginning apologist, before the internet was really going, and before I was plugged into the more scholarly sources, I tried a kind of folk etymology on that, and said, okay, well, even though the crucifixion from one perspective was really bad, it was also really good because it provided the salvation of the world, and that's why it's called Good Friday.
I think I've actually heard that one, Jimmy. Maybe I heard it from you.
No, sorry.
Okay.
That's
Nice
not where
buzzer.
it comes from. Yeah. So we haven't always pronounced words exactly the same way we pronounce them now.
Yep.
And originally it was God's Friday.
Which?
God's Friday.
Oh.
And that got blended as English evolved into Good Friday. But it's originally God's Friday because of what God did for us on that day.
I gotcha. And Holy Saturday.
Well, that one's
It's just
obvious. It's
Holy-
Saturday of Holy Week.
But Easter, I don't know. Easter what? I mean, I know what Easter Sunday is.
Right.
Easter Sunday, the resurrection of the Lord. But,
Right, but where do we get that word?
Yeah.
Well, you will hear some people say we get it from the goddess Ishtar, and that proves that Easter is a pagan holiday. Well, only someone who speaks English or maybe German would even possibly think that, because it's only in English and German that you encounter
Right.
that kind of name.
Right.
Everywhere else, it's different. In Italian, it's and Spanish and Portuguese and Swedish and Dutch and French. It's all based on the word for Passover.
Yeah.
Pesach in Hebrew, and so they just took the
Pasqua or something.
Pasqua, Pascoa,
Yeah.
Pasch, and things like that. So
Yep.
you have all this cluster of words, all clearly, based on Passover. I was once talking to a lady from England who happened to be a neo-pagan, and she was saying, "Oh no, I know Easter's pagan because in my village we called it Pesagi." I was like, "Well, guess where you got that word? It's from Pesach. It's the Hebrew word for Passover." But in terms of where Easter comes from, it's a little unclear. It's obviously a word that has Germanic roots. According to the English church historian, the Venerable Bede, who lived, like the 9th century, and he's a doctor of the church. In his book on the Reckoning of Time, he says that the feast of Easter takes its name from a month on an old-fashioned calendar, and the calendar was even old-fashioned in his day. And that month was basically April, which is when Easter typically falls. But he said that the month was named after a Germanic goddess named Eostre. And so that's what he claims. But even then, he doesn't have personal knowledge of this because he's talking about stuff before his time.
Right.
And so as a result of that, he doesn't have personal knowledge, and we have no other record of this goddess ever being worshipped by anybody. This is like the only mention. And so it's possible that he was just wrong on this.
Yeah.
But however the word evolved, it seems the English word Easter comes from Germanic roots connected with the time of the year when it falls, and that has nothing to do with where Easter, the celebration, came from, which is from the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus.
And Bede, this great scholar, lived in what some people call the Dark Ages, where they say nothing good happened.
The sun shone even in the Dark Ages.
Like Bede proves that was not the case. More on Easter and Holy Week and the Easter season with Jimmy Akin when we come back on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live.
Hi, this is Trent Horn, and I'm here to tell you about my new book, Hard Sayings, a Catholic approach to answering Bible difficulties. Have you ever read something in the Bible that confused you? Or has a skeptic ever asked you to explain a scandalous passage and you didn't know what to say? Doesn't Genesis contradict science? Why does the Bible promote slavery? How could God order his people to kill women and children? It's happened to just about everyone. But now you have a place to turn for the answers. In Hard Sayings, I look at dozens of the most confounding passages in Scripture and offer clear, reasonable, and Catholic keys to unlocking their true meaning. After reading this book, you'll be equipped to answer the toughest questions skeptics ask about the Bible. So don't be left without an answer again. Order your copy of Hard Sayings today by calling 1-888-291-8000, by visiting the shop at Catholic.com, or by asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
It's been called a crash course in salvation history, the perfect addition to CCD and RCIA reading lists. Catholic Answers' new graphic novel, The Big Picture, has set the Catholic book world on fire with its unique and innovative blend of apologetics and entertainment. With high-quality, full-color illustrations and a storyline that's easy to follow, The Big Picture reveals a story full of passion, suspense, adventure, and hope, engaging the reader immediately as our heroes come face-to-face with the drama and mystery of God's plan for the salvation of the world. It gets readers talking and thinking, captivating and entertaining them with eternal truths presented in a non-threatening way. Get your friends and family talking about things that matter. Order your copy of The Big Picture today by calling 1-888-291-8000, logging on to Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Holy Week has begun, and so we're talking about Holy Week, Easter, and the Easter season, and what we celebrate and why we celebrate in those ways at those times. I have delayed long enough going to phones, just asking you my own questions about Maundy Thursday and whatnot.
Interesting.
Yep, my questions were interesting, or your answers were? Oh, my questions were?
Yeah.
Oh, all right. I'm very proud of myself then. Lindsay in San Diego, California, listening on 1000 AM. You are on with Jimmy Akin. What's your question?
Hi, this is Lindsay in San Diego. I'm so excited to talk to you, Cy. You came to my church and you were giving some talks about Catholic radio and you passed out stickers. So you gave me my personal AM 1000 sticker I have on my car.
That is really, I'm glad to have some evidence that I went to a church, because I'm not sure everyone always believes it, but I have seen the inside of a church. All right, what's your question?
And Lindsay, it sounds like you're in your car right now, so you're near that sticker.
I am. Yeah. I am. Yes, my question is, so yesterday, the reading from Matthew, when it talked about Jesus going and praying alone in the garden, my question is, how do we know what he said when it said, that he asked God that this cup passed from his lips? How do we know that he said that if he was alone?
Well, there are sort of two ways you could look at this. One of them is, even though he then was arrested and taken away from the disciples and didn't really have a lot of quality time with them before the crucifixion, he did have quality time with them after the resurrection for about 40 days, according to Luke. So he could have told them during that 40 days. However, so that's a possibility. However, I tend to favor a slightly different theory, which is he wasn't fully alone. He had the disciples with him. Now, he initially had all 12, and then, except for Judas, and he then took Peter and James and John a little further on, and then he himself went a little further yet. And so he's kind of at a couple of removes from the main group of disciples, but he's still pretty close to kind of the core three. And so my assumption would be that even though they did fall asleep during that period, that they didn't fall asleep the second he moved off, and so they heard the gist of his prayer. And so I would suspect, I mean, I don't know if you've ever been, but maybe, hopefully, if you haven't, someday you'll have the opportunity to go to Jerusalem and visit the Mount of Olives, because the Garden of Gethsemane, at least our understanding of where it was, is not a huge place. And so if you have these three groups of people, Jesus himself, the core disciples, and the rest of the disciples, in that kind of space, they likely could have been within earshot, especially if Jesus was praying out loud and not, say, whispering, which if he was as distressed as he says he was, he may well have been doing. He may have been praying quite loudly. And so I would suspect that that's how that tradition was preserved, but it also could have been something Jesus himself talked about during the 40 days he spent with the disciples after the resurrection.
And thank you very much for that call, Lindsay, and thanks for keeping that bumper sticker on your car. Those Catholic Radio bumper stickers make a difference in people's lives. Jim in Friendswood, Texas, listening on 1430 AM Guadalupe Radio. Jim, you are on with Jimmy Akin. What's your question?
After his arrest in the garden, Jesus was taken before the high priest and then to Pontius Pilate on Friday morning. Where was, I'm assuming he was held in captivity. Where was Jesus held on Thursday night? Where did he spend Thursday night?
Apparently at the house of the high priest.
Yes. Okay.
And in fact, if you go to what's considered the traditional site of the house of the high priest in Jerusalem today, they'll actually take you down to a room that some people speculate may have been the room. And interestingly, in this room, there's kind of a stain on the wall of a man in a praying kind of posture. And some people have speculated that could even be Jesus's. We don't know that, but that's the speculation. But the inference seems to be that Jesus was held at the house of the high priest.
I had thought I'd heard it on your program previously, and obviously I must be mistaken, but I thought I had read or heard that he was held in a cistern, either a semi-dry or a dry cistern, overnight, and I just didn't know whether we knew that.
Well, we know that the prophet Jeremiah was held in a cistern, but there's nothing in Scripture that says that Jesus was held in a cistern. Also, we shouldn't overestimate the amount of time that he would have been able to spend alone anyway. There was a court proceeding, at night after the arrest, which was already late because the disciples were falling asleep. And so then he gets arrested. There's a preliminary interview with Annas, the former high priest. Then there's a proceeding with the Sanhedrin under Caiaphas. And then there's a short space of time where he apparently was alone before the Sanhedrin reconvened in the morning and then took him to Pilate. And Pilate is talking to him by 6 a.m., and so there's not a lot of time in there for him to be held alone, but apparently it was in the high priest's house.
Okay, Jim?
Well, thank you for the answer.
Thank you very much, Jim, for that call. Our topic is Holy Week, Easter, and the Easter season. We go now to Anonymous in Minnow, North Dakota, listening on 91.1 Real Presence Radio. Anonymous, you are on with Jimmy Akin.
Hey, Jimmy, I say.
Hi.
Say, it's always been curious to me why the church has decided to kind of have an interactive gospel during Holy Week. Is there any explanation for that?
It's done twice a year, and it's done on one of the two times is on Passion Sunday or Palm Sunday, and obviously this is the core of the gospel story. I mean, this is what Jesus came to do. And so that's why we have a very lengthy reading of the gospel by comparison to other days. And having it read interactively, as you say, with different people playing different parts, is a way of forcing it to be more memorable and help people contemplate it more and pay attention more. And so it's just a way of underlining the special significance of this and helping people absorb it more. And so, for example, when you have the people at Mass reading the part of the crowd and saying, "Crucify him," it's a way of emphasizing to all of us that Jesus died because of our sins. There's a sense in which we sent him to the cross. And so by having us read that out loud, it in a sense makes us take responsibility for this and recognize that we're sinners in need of his redemption.
That makes sense. Do you know how long has the church been, is this something that they've always done, or is this
It's something that has been done in recent times. I don't know the history of this, but we've got 2,000 years of history, and we've got a bunch of different rites in the church. And so I know that forms of liturgical expression have changed dramatically and vary from one place to another. So I wouldn't be at all surprised for this to have popped up in various places in the Christian world, but I don't have detailed knowledge of that.
Thank you very much, Anonymous, for that call. We go now to Sheila in Columbia, South Carolina, listening on the Sirius Radio app on EWTN.
Hi, Cy. Hi, Jimmy. This is Sheila.
Howdy.
For taking my call. Cy, I'm so glad that you're on board Shoes to Fill, and you're doing an amazing job. So really enjoy listening to you.
Well,
Jimmy,
thank
you answered my first question earlier, and that was how to describe Easter. But my second question, if I heard you correctly, was that the first Easter was in 33 A.D.?
Right.
And I thought that A.D. meant after death.
No. That's you sometimes hear that, and it would be understandable because BC, the opposite of AD, means before Christ. So that's where we get BC. And people therefore try to find an English explanation for AD, and after death is a common one. I've heard that before. That's not actually what it means, though. It's actually from Latin, and in Latin, AD stands for Anno Domini. And Anno Domini, if you translate it into English, means the year of the Lord. And so that's how sometimes you'll notice in English, especially let's say you're watching period fiction on TV, like on the BBC or something, and you'll hear people saying, in the year of our Lord, 1850. Well, that's the English translation of AD, the year of the Lord. And so that's what it means. It's theoretically meant to date after his birth. Really, he was born 2 or 3 years earlier than that, but the calculation we use was one that was come up with in the 500s by a monk named Dionysius Exiguus, or Dennis the Short. And he misdated the birth of Christ slightly, but it's approximately correct. And so today is 2017, so it's the year of our Lord 2017, and it would thus be AD 2017. By the way, notice the placement of AD in front of the year. BC comes after, so like 2000 BC means the 2000th year before Christ, but it would make no sense to say 2017, the year of the Lord.
Oh, yeah.
You need to say the year of the Lord 2017, and so it's AD 2017.
How's that, Sheila?
That's excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I should have asked her if she knew what Maundy Thursday was, but...
Well, she would have heard the answer to that if she heard the other one.
Yeah, but... that's right. I'm just so proud of myself that I know it now. AD is kind of fading in some places. They have another one. What's the name of that?
CE
Common
and
Era.
BCE.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So you say CE for... But common what? What does that mean? Common to
Well,
what?
so the idea is that that all the religions, we want all the religions to get along. And so there's this common era that we're using for dating purposes, and it happens to be the same as the AD-BC system. But we don't want to say AD, BC because not everybody believes that Jesus is the Lord or that he's the Christ. And so for people who don't, like non-Christian Jews or Muslims or other people, we'll just use CE for Common Era instead of AD, and BCE before the Common Era for BC. but it's really just a politically correct version of AD and BC.
Mm-hmm. Is it? Yeah, it is. Okay. But we better take a break, Jimmy, before we go back to more calls. More calls when we come back on Easter, Holy Week, and the Easter season. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and we will be taking those calls in just a minute right here on Catholic Answers Live.
Call and ask Jimmy your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Today we live in an age of spiritual crisis. We all have friends and loved ones who don't practice their Catholic faith, who are torn by doubts, or who have left the faith altogether. So often at Catholic Answers, we get asked to recommend a book to help people like this. There are lots of good books that address specific issues a person may have, but very few are designed to be put into the hands of such a person, are short and easy to read, and cover a wide variety of reasons for the Catholic faith and its teaching. That's why we're publishing Trent Horn's new book, Why We're Catholic. In a series of brief chapters, Trent covers the whole range of common topics, starting with why we believe anything at all, and proceeding to cover science, the existence of God, the arguments for Jesus, and the common objections to the Catholic faith, both doctrinal and moral. We want Why We're Catholic to be that book, that one general book you can hand out to someone as a starting point for helping them find their way back to the Church and to God. We even hope to distribute cases of the book in churches so people can take copies home to give to their friends and loved ones. To make your donation and get a free copy of Why We're Catholic, visit Catholic.com and click the Why We're Catholic banner, or call us toll-free at 888-291-8000. That's the Why We're Catholic banner at Catholic.com, or call toll-free 888-291-8000.
We have a big problem. Our culture is dying, and souls are in danger of being lost. The answer is conversion to Jesus Christ in His Church. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a Catholic organization, and we have hundreds of teams spreading the good news throughout the country. But we need your help. The harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Homeschool Connections, an online provider of courses for your Catholic homeschool, is a sponsor of Catholic Answers Live. Homeschool Connections website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Call now with your question, 888-318-7884. This is Catholic Answers Live.
And welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest this hour. Holy Week, Easter, and the Easter season. Any questions about what we celebrate and why we celebrate that way during those seasons, we are happy to take. We go to James in Greenville, South Carolina, listening on Mediatrix Radio, AM 1300. James, you are on with Jimmy Akin. What's your question?
Yes. Hello, Jimmy.
Howdy.
I'm sponsoring or was sponsoring a Jewish man who is contemplating entering the church this year, and he asked a question that I didn't know much about, and that is that he had read in the different Gospels what he purports are different accounts of when Christ actually was crucified. That he was under the assumption that one Gospel said that he was crucified before Passover, and others made it seem like he was crucified on Passover. I didn't do any research about that to find out if even his report was correct, but I was wondering if you had any information about that.
Yeah, this is something that a lot of people have talked about, and if you want to read a scholarly discussion of this, there are a couple of resources I can recommend before I'll give you a brief answer. One of them is the book Handbook of Biblical Chronology by Jack Finnegan, F-I-N, just one N, E-G-A-N. It's an outstanding resource. It's recently come back into print, deals with all aspects of biblical chronology, including this, in a lot of detail. Another is a more recent book by a scholar named Andrew Steinman, and it's called From Abraham to Paul. And both of them address this question. Also, I have a short account of it in my book, A Daily Defense. So that's another one that you might want to check out. Basically, there are a couple of issues here. Now, in the Synoptic Gospels, the Last Supper is described as a Passover meal. And Jesus is then crucified the day after the Last Supper. But because of the way the Jewish day was commonly reckoned as beginning at sunset, They would have then eaten the Passover on Passover evening, and then Jesus would have been crucified on Passover day. Now, so that's the portrait given by the Synoptic Gospels. In John's Gospel, you get a little bit of a different picture. You will often hear people say that according to John's Gospel, Jesus was crucified at 3 p.m., and it does indicate that he was crucified at the 9th hour, which by the Roman reckoning from sunrise would put it at 3 p.m., but that's when he died. But you'll often hear people say that he was crucified when they were sacrificing the Passover lambs at the temple. It actually doesn't say that. That's an inference that's out there, but the Gospels do not say that. What John's Gospel does say that has led some people to think that that Jesus was not crucified on Passover is at the beginning of the day, when the Jewish authorities take Jesus to Pilate. John comments that they don't go into the Praetorium, which was kind of Pilate's headquarters in Jerusalem. They don't go into the Praetorium because they hadn't yet eaten the Passover, and they don't want to become ritually unclean, which would prevent them from eating it on schedule. Well, so that's led some people to say, okay, so Passover hasn't happened yet if they're expecting to eat the Passover later that day. So Jesus would have to be crucified the afternoon before Passover begins at sunset. Well, the thing is, if you did become unclean, you take a ritual bath and you become clean again at sunset. So they would have been able to eat the Passover meal anyway. A suggestion that I find very attractive is one that Steinman makes in his book, and it's simply this: they were too busy the previous night to eat Passover when everybody else did, because they didn't know exactly when Jesus was going to be arrested, because Judas didn't know where they were going to meet. Judas initially had to find out, where the Last Supper is. He had to find out what they're going to do, where they're going to go then at Gethsemane. Judas then has to go get the authorities and get them to send a group of soldiers to arrest Jesus. Then he has to be arrested. Then they stay up all night trying him. And so between all of that happening, they were just too busy. In particular, eating the Passover meal involves drinking significant quantities of wine. It did in this day, certainly. And if you're staying up to wait for this arch villain, in your opinion, to be arrested, you don't want to be falling asleep. And so even the disciples were falling asleep. So this was very late. You've got a good argument they would have delayed the Passover meal, not knowing when Jesus was going to be arrested. Then they were busy with all those transactions. And so they hadn't yet eaten it by early morning when they're with Pilate at 6 a.m. And so they're presumably planning on, as soon as they make the handoff to Pilate, they're going to go eat the Passover.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, Jesus was crucified on Passover day after the Passover evening, which, like most Jews, the disciples had celebrated at the normal time. I should mention there's another possibility too, which is that just like Jesus made changes in the Passover evening celebration, like introducing the Eucharist in the middle of it, he could have changed the timing as well. And since the apostles recognized that Jesus was the Son of God and had authority over celebrations like this, they would have gone along with that. And so if Jesus wanted to celebrate Passover a day earlier than the authorities were celebrating that, the apostles would have gone along with that. And that would also explain this. Also, it's been noted that there were different calendars that were in use in first century Judaism. For example, the Essenes were famous for having a different calendar than the Jerusalem authorities. That was one of their principal criticisms of the Jerusalem authorities, was they didn't like the calendar that they were using, and they had their own calendar. So it's also possible that Jesus and his disciples could have used a different calendar for calculating Passover than the Jewish authorities did. Those are all possibilities.
Okay. All right. Yes, he's been perplexed by different arguments that he's been listening to from a Jewish rabbi online by the name of Tovia Singer.
Okay.
So I don't know if you're familiar with that individual and could give me any resources that would clarify, from a Catholic perspective, some of the arguments that this Tovia Singer makes.
I don't know him personally, but I would suggest your friend is always welcome to contact us here at Catholic Answers. He's welcome to call in on the show. And he also might want to check out the writings of Roy I'm gonna blank on the last name now. Roy Schoenman, author of Salvation is from the Jews, and also the Association of Hebrew Catholics.
And this show gets archived, so you can go back and find it on YouTube or Facebook.
Or Catholic.com.
Yeah, or Catholic.com, so you can always just share exactly what Jimmy just said with your friend. Thank you very much, James, for that call. We go now to Bob in St. Paul, Minnesota, listening on the Catholic Answers app. Bob, you're on with Jimmy Akin. What's your question?
My question is kind of a continuation of what you were just talking about.
Uh-huh.
I think in a couple different Gospels, I'm sorry, I'm in a car, have different timings of when Jesus may have entered Jerusalem. Once after Lazarus, one a couple days later and one was several days later. Mm-hmm. And I've heard it interpreted to being the days before. Long story short, that under Jewish law, you could celebrate the Passover earlier. And the thought is he celebrated it on Wednesday because there's just too many people in Jerusalem. And he celebrated it on Wednesday, and then that allowed for the greater time to accomplish everything that happened of going to Annas and then Caiaphas and then Pilate and then Herod and then back to Pilate and all this stuff.
Okay,
there's a discrepancy between the gospel or perceived discrepancy based on calendars. I think one was based on a scene. Like
Bob, I'm unclear what your question for me is.
Is there a thought that he celebrated it on Wednesday based upon the gospel readings of when he came into Jerusalem?
I'm aware of theories that have been proposed by single individual scholars, but they're kind of out there on their own. I'm not aware of any significant consensus regarding that. It's real clear that Jesus was crucified on a Friday because the Gospels say that. They call it the Day of Preparation, which was the standard idiom in Jewish society for Friday, because on Saturday, on the Sabbath, you couldn't cook or do other business you needed to do. So you had to get all that out of the way on Friday, which made Friday the day of preparation. And it's real clear that's when Jesus was crucified. I'm aware that I'm aware of one scholar who has proposed that he celebrated the Last Supper either on Wednesday or even Tuesday, but this is not something that has been persuasive to most scholars. Most scholars don't feel that's necessary.
Okay, Bob, thank you very much. We'll go real quick to Jay. Jay, can you ask your question really quick so Jimmy can get to it before the top of the hour?
Absolutely. So in the Nicene Creed, we say, that Jesus was he crucified, died, and buried. He descended into hell and on the third day rose again. Mm-hmm. But at the crucifixion, Jesus told the thief that wasn't like the root thief that today you will be with me in paradise.
Right.
So you see the disconnect that I'm struggling with.
You're wondering how would he be in paradise with the thief that day if he went to hell. Is that correct?
Right. If it says he went to hell for 3 days.
Here's the answer. The word hell, as it's used in the Creed, doesn't mean the place of the damned. It's an older English use of the word where it just means the place of the dead. And the dead, the good ones, can end up in paradise. And so that's one aspect of the question. Also, it's not clear what the word today is modifying in that statement. He could mean, I tell you today, you'll be with me in paradise. Or he could mean, I tell you, today you'll be with me in paradise. Could be either one according to the Greek.
And thank you very much for that, Jay. Thank you for everyone who called. Next hour, Father Tad Paholchek will be here to talk about bioethics, issues in bioethics. If you've got any questions about medical procedures or new advances in the bioethics or in the biology field that you would like addressed by an ethicist and a trained scientist, Father Tad is the man for that. Jimmy Akin, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure.
We'll see you later in the week.
Yeah.
For Good Friday.
Good Friday.
All right. Thanks for being with us. We'll be right back on Catholic Answers Live.